Johan, you're at this event because it almost exemplifies the type of collaboration that many people think is necessary for the agricultural sector to fully realize its potential both here and throughout Africa. Could you comment on that?
I think it's an excellent opportunity where we can showcase agriculture's role in the value chain of the GDP in Africa. Although on the primary side we know it doesn't contribute as much in certain of the countries, the fact that we work together to collaborate to enable primary farmers to have value beyond their farm gate, and the platform that the Indaba creates for that is an immense opportunity, specifically in countries in Africa where there is great growth prospects and unearthing of a lot of opportunities that will help to grow the Africa Agri agenda. And I think the Indaba within its second year now is showing the momentum that is giving. I know in agriculture you need obviously also have a lot of infrastructure development and a lot of policy influences agriculture, and because we have also the public sector environment of the various countries involved here, we have that opportunity to engage and have the agenda set up that can be taking place as well.
Now in the Western Cape, there have been some quite successful initiatives, collaborative initiatives between the private sector and the public sector. Would you say that
I think what we have in the Western Cape is a public sector, specifically economic opportunities department or ministry that focuses on agriculture development, specifically focused on agri processing to create jobs. I think that is one of the ministerial objectives, and I think that creates with good data that we can work into intelligence, because we have a department of agriculture of the Western Cape that's very active within the understanding the footprint of agriculture here and the opportunities to expand that. So that gives you always, if you look at development, the opportunity to bring in the private sector, because we have an active and well managed public sector. So I think it's the secret lies between that. Secondly, we have a very diverse commodity environment in the Western Cape. I know we're going through a drought, but it's climatic. Climatic things happen in any areas of the world. We've heard at the conference there's, I think, 60 or 80 countries, cities in the world that are actually going through immense drought environments. So we know that climate change plays a role, but as climate change plays a role, agriculture can adapt as well. Different commodities plays a different role in different climates, and the Western Cape have got that diversity to enable that as well.
Have other provinces, is there a collaboration between the Western Cape and other provinces in South Africa in terms of knowledge sharing?
Well, I can just speak for Absa Bank. I mean, where I'm involved, we have an agri-business Centre of Excellence in Johannesburg that serves the whole country. So we share knowledge of our customer base, which obviously is a base that is big enough to get enough information from. So I think the private sector uses it well, but unfortunately in some of the provincial departments of agriculture, the functionality of really supporting development is not there, or hasn't been developed well enough, or hasn't been maintained maybe well enough, like the Western Cape. And I think we have a fair advantage, where it's got an unfair advantage then there, that we still have a very functional public sector environment there.
That's also probably an opportunity for other provinces to pursue, though, if they choose to implement the same practices.
I think a great question. If you look at the ecosystem of agriculture, if you don't have the policy first, you can't stimulate the growth. So I think provinces are seeing that, as I mentioned in the beginning, the value chain enhancement of GDP. For as soon as you go into the value chain, the catalyst that agriculture gives in GDP, being it then into the secondary environments like manufacturing, or then even into wholesale and into retail, and I think that creates great opportunities for provinces to say, in a country where we now have slow economic growth, that can be a catalyst.
Do you think the contribution of agriculture is actually perhaps underestimated, where the 2% or whatever is calculated according to what basis?
The 2% is basically calculated on the primary output
Right.
of the farm produce.
So the
But-
ripple effect is not factored in.
It's not factored in that way, but it's factored in discussions when we have, say, a discussion on a certain commodity. Take the grain, the grain commodity of wheat, because we produce wheat in the Western Cape, and how long that is. How many role players are involved and touching on various parts of the economy. In the end, you need a bread on the table, and to get that bread on the table, there is many points of that value chain that creates jobs, that creates economic value, that creates a logistic environment. Logistics is becoming par for the technology development. Logistics in agriculture plays a massive role, even bigger sometimes than the production part of it.
There's this mysterious, or this magical phrase called unlocking the value chain.
Yeah.
What does it actually mean in an agricultural perspective?
Well, I can just take what I've heard from the Indaba. They say a chain you can only pull, you can't push a chain. We need to pull a few chains just to get our water saved and that. The Western Cape is interesting in that regard. But I think to build a chain is always two things. The weakest link is going to play a role there as well. One, and secondly, you need to have your consumer pull closer to the primary producer. You have your chain shorter so that you can actually unlock better value and more potential for the people we need to feed. And I think that's where the paradox lies sometimes between, if you look at intermediaries that make the chain very long, maybe some of the capital is lost there and the end producer don't get the value of that.
What are some of the weakest links at present?
Difficult to say. I think if you look at technology development, they're looking at certain, for instance, apps that they develop to make take the grain chain, for instance, where there's opportunities perhaps to look, if you look at the miller's environment, where the mills need to, the buyers of the wheat need to work on it to make it into maize meal and things like that. I think there's a lot of the fragmented nature of, say, organizations that represent those different role players. There might be some consolidation there that can help to make the chain shorter, and then you have a pull effect.
Looking beyond our borders, what is ABS's current involvement in agriculture development in the rest of Africa?
Well, as Barclays Africa, as we're known in Africa, we have got representation in 13 territories, more towards the eastern part of Africa. And we are, in some countries we've been there from 1914 through our Barclays previous shareholder parent. For instance, Kenya and Tanzania, is very, very big on the agenda for us. Zambia plays a big role. We also grow through the Botswana territory and corridors. And those are countries that play a big role where our primary producers can also get a footprint. So if we look at South Africa's primary producer environment as a springboard to go into these countries, we have big plans for some of our customers that ask us the questions of how are you going to help us to get into those countries, because as you know, South Africa hasn't got the best soil to develop or to grow the food that's needed to feed Africa. It is lying towards the Ecuador corridor of Africa, and I think that's where we can play a role for them also to expand their territory and be closer to their customers, because sometimes you produce, for instance, something in South Africa, but you're anyway going to export it to Zambia, and we can rather produce it right there in Zambia and make the logistic chain then much shorter, much more like what the retailers are currently already doing, and we're following them as well. We're creating opportunities for the retailers that's in Africa to assist them with the agriculture produce that they need also to sell in their shops.
Does it also work the other way, where the agro-processing capabilities of South Africa can be put to use on primary production grown elsewhere?
I think the pull factor can be in a reverse environment as well, because I think the agro-processing gives you two things. It gives you an opportunity to create more jobs, and they have economic value created there, but it also creates an opportunity where you can, because you're adding value to the product, it becomes more valuable or more worth. So there's unlocking of that environment, but you would like to place it as close as possible to where the end user is going to be. And I think that's part of also stabilizing the local economy, that we look at urbanization as one part of influence in the world, feeding the world, but agriculture has always played and will play and should play a role into the normal economy of where local economies need to be supported, and that is a big role player to help people to get jobs around where they actually grow up or are used to being, rather than just having to run to cities.
Now finally, there are signs that the region is opening up a bit politically. There's Angola, where interesting things are happening, and Zimbabwe, where we are certainly hoping for the best. What would the effect be if, say, Zimbabwe returned to approximately full production? The opportunities for the region that would happen?
Well, I think if you look at SADC, for instance, the role that Zimbabwe has played in SADC previously, being, let's call it, a breadbasket for the region, that will be wonderful for our region, for the opportunity created that we can produce closer to where actually the people need the food, and for the opportunity that, because we're sitting with better soils to produce in Zimbabwe, it creates shorter corridors to also do exports and create value for the SADC region to earn some dollars, for instance, in that environment. So I'm very positive that agriculture will play a big role to help Zimbabwe to get on their feet again.
Yes, here's wishing the people of Zimbabwe the best of luck in their future endeavors. Thank you very much, Johan.
Thank you very much.